It's easier than a tire.
It's weird because I have like a really good way of engaging a child and like calming them down and stuff. And there's like 14 other people on
No, he's waiting for you.
Oh,
Second session, if you need the notes, just go to the website and you can download the PDF with all the notes. Okay, this session we're going to examine the role of the children. Go over to Ephesians chapter 6. Ephesians 6. Paul writes here, starting verses 1 through 3, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, that it may be well with you, and that you may live long on the earth." Now, Paul writes something similar over in Colossians 3:21. There he writes, "Children, be obedient to your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord." So very similar. And that's the role that is given to children, and so it's very simple. The role of children is to obey their parents. That's really what it boils down to. And yet, in view of the actual practice within society, those practices exist within the church as well. We have to conclude that this scriptural directive has been forgotten or confused by the vast majority of parents. They don't seem to understand it. And there's two extremes within our society when it comes to their children. We want to avoid both of those. We want to focus on what the Lord has directed us. The first extreme is more prevalent in our society, and I'll call it open fields. There's a boundary somewhere out there, but you're just not sure you can find it. Okay, it's pretty much whatever the child wants to do, the child does. That's a very basic change in our society. It's certainly radically different than the 1950s. I was born in '58. It was changing in the 60s and 70s. By 80s and 90s, it's pretty much passé, and now you seem pretty weird if you are not doing that. But it's a philosophical basis that's behind secular psychology that has made this fundamental change in our understanding ourselves. Because no longer are people, especially children, seen as responsible for themselves. Someone else is always responsible. I like to summarize psychology as find the dead woman, because usually it's mom who gets blamed. But if she's alive, then she has her own problems, who blames her mother. But if she's alive, then you have to deal with her. So find the mom who's dead. You can blame her and then you're all okay. That's wrong. That's not how it works. It goes back to Adam and Eve. Everybody always blames somebody else. But it's a fact within our society. It's a loss of responsibility. There's always some mitigating factor behind the negative behaviors. When Americans were a biblically literate people, it was very commonly understood that evil arises because people are sinful. We don't do what God wants. And so evil actions were understood as something that's coming from an evil heart. There's an evil desire. And then evil was held in check by each individual being held responsible for what they did, and then dispensing an appropriate correction or chastening for whatever sin is committed. Proverbs 22:15 was widely known and recognized. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of discipline will remove it far from him. The only cure for sin, though, ultimately is Jesus Christ. It's only through faith in him and his atonement that we can actually be forgiven. And it's only through the Holy Spirit that the heart is regenerated and that sanctification can take place as he empowers us to become the people God is changing us to become. It changes us from the inside outward. Now, our society commonly believes man is basically good, and that any evil that he commits is because of some environmental factor, poverty. My dad grew up in abject poverty. Talking with my aunt, and they said, we didn't even know we were poor because everybody was poor. That's what it was, the 1920s and 30s in deep rural South. Poverty. You don't mind a worm in an apple unless it's half a worm. If you're going to take your meal, sift it first and take out the bugs unless you're really kind of craving some protein, in case leave them in. That's poverty. There wasn't rampant evil running through the community. So that's commonly used, though. It's being poor. It's being that some environmental factor, or there's psychological damage that somebody else caused. And because of those philosophical foundations, there's a widespread erroneous notions, including poverty causes crime. Disease causes alcoholism. It's an elbow disease. You got it? Spanking causes aggression and is the reason that some people become serial killers. Freud claimed that the improper potty training leads to, quote, possessiveness, retentiveness, aggressiveness, pronounced messiness, or tidiness, so either direction, punctuality, and shame, unquote. Or someone simply described it, bad potty training results in emotional constipation. Now, the basic philosophical premise concerning children now is this. Kids are innately good and will grow up to be good adults as long as the parents don't mess them up. And so parents are always in fear that they're going to do something that's going to destroy their child, and they're responsible for it. And that's the philosophy that's out there. That's what's going on. We're told to provide children the right environment, give them freedom to explore, don't inhibit their efforts to express themselves. And if that is done, the so-called experts then claim the kids are going to turn out to be healthy adult members of society. And so it's just fear. I am afraid. How do I satisfy this child's every whim and not destroy him if I mess something up and don't do it? The philosophy behind Dr. Benjamin Spock's famous quote, you can't spoil a baby, his wants are his needs, has resulted in the baby becoming the center of the family. And that means everything else starts changing to focus simply on baby's needs. And that philosophy then continues on into childhood. Now, what's the results of that kind of philosophy? Well, we've all seen it. Just go out in public. Kids running up and down store aisles without supervision, knocking things off the shelf, running into you. They don't care. In the line, screaming and hollering and throwing a tantrum because they want the candy bar, telling their parents to shut up. Cursing. It's a little strange to hear curse words coming out of a 4-year-old's mouth. It's not uncommon anymore. I've been in homes where the walls were marked up as high as the child could reach, sometimes nearly solid. Woe to the landlord. Who rented that house? It's expensive to change all that around. The child's doing whatever they want. Diane and I determined there was a particular family that came out of the house once. We were young. In fact, we didn't have kids at that point. And we determined they're never coming back. Period. They would never be in our house again because the two children, the one that was mobile, was actually running along the top of our couch. Not the bottom part where you sit, along the top. The parents were sitting there and doing nothing. Diane called me into a conference into the bathroom because she wanted to find some privacy. The husband figured out with this conference, even before he heard what it was, like, something must be going on. So he did take a little bit of control. We said, we're never allowing that. Actually came out of that something as we thought about it and talked about it. It says, you know what, we're going to have a new philosophy for our home. It's our home. You're welcome to be here as our guests. And if your child's acting up, we give the parent the freedom, please correct your child. However, if you will not correct your child, I will correct your child because A, your child needs the correction, and B, you need to be shamed. Okay? So I will correct your children in my home if you don't. I will give you time, I'll be patient, but I am going to deal with it. I am responsible for protecting my home. But all this is coming out of a worldly philosophy. Now I need to put this caveat here. This friend of mine who was down here had just graduated from Bible college. I wonder what they were being taught. Now as children get older, the problem just increases. Teens who remain immature and self-centered, and they will remain that way if you let them. And so by the time they're teens, they are no longer identifying with you, they're identifying with their friends, what they want to do, and that is going to end up in rebellion. And that's why people look, of course they're going to rebel, think it's a normal stage of life. It's not normal. It's not normal historically in our nation, and it's not normal around the world in other cultures. It's something that has become normal in America as progressive philosophy has taken over. Cheating, stealing, lying, hurting other people, of no consequence to them as long as they get or do what they want. And so you can see that these are on a path that's going to lead to jail or worse. Well, the Proverbs have just proven true. Here's a couple of Proverbs dealing with that. Proverbs 20:20. He who curses his father or his mother, his lamp will go out in time of darkness. Proverbs 19:26. He who assaults his father and drives his mother away is a shameful and disgraceful son, to say the least. Proverbs 29:15, the rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child who gets his own way brings shame to his mother. Proverbs 30:17, the eye that mocks a father and scorns a mother, the ravens of the valley will pick it out, and the young eagles will eat it. That's pretty strong, because you're really looking at, they're going their own way, they're going to end up dying. The shame is the least of it. Now, that's one area, so it's an open field, basically no restrictions, or very few. The other one is not as common anymore, but it's the other extreme. I recall this restricted stalls. It can be found, it's just harder to find now. And this is that the child is confined. The child is severely limited to what they're allowed to do. It's sort of the idea of children are to be seen and not heard, and seen rarely. That was a philosophy at one time that was fairly common. In this view, children are not the center of the family. They're somewhere out in the peripheral, orbiting the family. Dad views himself not necessarily as head, but as king. The wife may or may not be queen, but in either case, a child is more of an object than a person. Loving care, nurture, all those things take a back seat to, you must keep the law of this house. So punishment is swift, may not match the crime at all. Scripture might be quoted a lot, out of context, applied correctly, incorrectly. Other scriptures dealing with the parents' responsibilities, well, we'll ignore those ones. Now in that type of home, the child exists for the benefit of the parents. And so this child is an intrusion upon the life of the parents. The child's main motivation ends up becoming fear. Fear of the parents, fear of God, because that's how God is presented. Not a proper reverence, but a terrifying fear of God. Fear of all authority figures. Children in such homes develop what is called a prohibitive conscience. They always feel guilty for everything. It must be my fault because I'm always blamed for everything. And life itself is more viewed in terms of what's restricted for them, not what they can do. There's not a positive aspect. It's just, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that. Not with, well, yeah, I can do that. That's not how they even think. They view life in terms of, thou shalt not. Now the child's outward behavior is everything, while they may exhibit exemplary discipline and manners, the heart of the child can be completely lost. So they look good outwardly, but the heart is far, far away. And when such children become adults, they have a distorted view of God. And that's why the scriptures warn parents, don't provoke your children to anger, and then don't exasperate them to they lose heart. We'll talk about that in detail when we get to the role of parents. Some children who grow up in such a home are going to reject what they were taught. They're going to become adults and they, quote unquote, go wild. Completely opposite of everything they were taught. Restrictions removed, they go the opposite extreme. And sometimes parents look for a college that has strict rules to try and delay that. It only delays it while in college, but as soon as they're out of college, it still happens. If it's a college without strict rules, it happens in college. Other children raised in that kind of home, their lives are going to be controlled by fear. They do what they believe is expected of them, but there's no joy in it anymore. It's been taken away. If it was a Christian home, they are the ones who become legalists. Spirituality is defined by this list of do's and don'ts, mostly don'ts. They don't understand freedom in Christ. And because of that reason, many of them will have false professions of faith. They're actually really not Christians. They're just living a conformed life to their culture. And then there are those that they actually do know Jesus personally, and maybe in some ways they're the most tragic, because their service of Christ becomes more responsibility and duty than privilege and opportunity. And so they've been robbed of the joy of their salvation. And that's very sad. So those are the two extremes. No restrictions, everything's restricted. Where's the balance? Well, we find it in the scriptures. But it comes from understanding the purpose and role of children within the family. So let me give you several purposes to start with. First, why do you have children? Well, it goes back to Genesis 1:28. Adam and Eve were told to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. If you don't have children, there's no future generation. And mankind is always just one generation away from extinction. Think about it. So you have children so they can have children so that mankind can continue on just as the Lord's commanded. All right, so there's one. Two, that actually has an idea because it should affect your parenting. If they're supposed to continue this process, you should train them so they can continue the process and succeed and be successful, and it continue the generation after that. Second, more important probably, is the continuation of the knowledge of God. Deuteronomy 6:4-7, Ephesians 6:4, all deal with these ideas. Genesis 6:4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And these words which I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall diligently teach them to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. You are to teach the next generation who God is, what He's like, what He wants you to do, what His commandments are. Psalm 78:5 deals with the same kind of idea. It says, He established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which He commanded our fathers, that they should teach them to their children, that the generation to come might know, even the children yet to be born, they may arise and tell to their children. So now we got to the grandkids, that they should put their confidence in God, not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments. So, generation after generation, but with that should come the knowledge of God, each generation to teach the next generation. Or as Ephesians 6:4 says simply, bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Now certainly people can come to know the Lord regardless of the beliefs of the parents. But let's face it, that's the Great Commission is all about that, taking the gospel to those who don't know. But certainly, where does evangelism begin? In your home. When you have a child and you bring that child home, what did you bring into your home? A little sinner. Diane didn't like that when we brought John home. He's innocent.
For about a week.
They're like, you're right, he is a sinner. And he was a great baby, but he was still a sinner. In fact, he was the kind of unusual baby that is hard to talk about because people would either be jealous.
Well, because he slept through the night so early, that's all.
Yeah, like at day 3. In fact, the doctor even said, you woke him up? What's wrong with you? Don't wake up a sleeping baby. Oh. Okay. So, but he's still a sinner. That's what you bring in. Evangelism begins at home. They're the first ones you're going to be teaching about Christ. The first ones you're going to lay out the foundation for them. You're going to need to model Christ to them in your own home as well, in your own life. You're going to instruct them in righteousness. And it's those who are doing that that are qualified for church leadership. That's required of elders. For pastors, you have to have your home in order. Your children have to be faithful. And if not, then you're not qualified. So this is going to be part of this. We were training them properly. Now, while God uses many people to be involved in the process of evangelism, He's placed upon us the responsibility of raising our children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. We have the primary responsibility to teach them. Other people can help. Sunday school can help. VBS can help. Christian schools can help. All those things are nice. You have the responsibility, though. It belongs to you. So please understand that one of the reasons that God has given you children is for you to pass on your knowledge of God and understanding of God to them, and for them to build upon that. If you're doing it right, they should surpass you, because they've got your foundation to build upon. A third purpose for children is to be a blessing. Psalm 127, verses 3 through 5. Behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior, so the children of one's youth. How blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They shall not be ashamed when they speak with the enemies in the gate. So that is what God says about kids. Doesn't seem to be what society often thinks about them, but that's what God has declared. They are a blessing. And they are, because they bring so much into our lives. And certainly there's heartaches, there's tough parts, but there's so much joy. Young children, they love life. They wonder at the world around them. They have happiness over the most simple pleasures. One of the fun things about the young ones is feeding them for ice cream the first time. That is a blast. New foods, right? They're enjoying it so much. Like, I wish I enjoyed ice cream as much as that. And I love ice cream. But wow, it's such a simple thing. But more importantly, really from the eternal perspective, is they teach us a lot about trusting God and walking with Him. They prod us to think less of ourselves and learn to love sacrificially, as I mentioned earlier. They reflect us in both the good and, well, the bad too. And so they're actually corrected to us. When you start hearing your children repeat, you, and it's like, God, where did they get that? And they got it from you? Ooh, I guess I need to be more careful.
And they always pick up, especially with mommy. It's never like the good things will work so hard, but it's like you're like a real quick. I'm on the road and a guy speeds up so he doesn't let me in, and I go, "Come on!" This is on Christmas Day, with her in the back. Come on, and I'm like,
well, come on's not so bad. There's a lot of other things.
Yeah. But it's like the same tone I'm doing it under, like duress and stress. Yeah.
That's where I came up with the acronym PENAGAM. Person in need of grace and mercy. And it helps in two ways. Instead of calling the person something else, you're like, what is that word? So you calm down before you remember the word. And then if you remember the word, you can remember what it means. Person in need of grace and mercy. I'm like, I have to do that too? Okay, I remember, here's God's commandment to me. Their very presence actually changes how we act. Think about that, just even common society, it's still that way for the most part. If you're present, people act differently. Children are a great blessing to God from us. Well, what then is the role of children within a family? Well, to put it simply, they're there to learn. Okay, obedience is part of that learning process. Parents are responsible to teach them. They are responsible to learn. Now, children, again, are not the center of the family, but they're not somewhere on the outskirts. They are part of the family. When you and your spouse got married, you formed a little circle. You held hands, you got your little circle. You're a family. As children come along, you welcome them in, and your circle gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you have you can have a huge circle. Our circles tend to be small, but it's just the size of your circle. How many are in your quiver? However many God puts there, right? And that's all up to Him. But that's your family. So you're together. They're not outside, they're not in the middle, they're simply part of your family. And so each new life added a precious soul for you to guide and direct toward godliness. Now, gentlemen, remember, Paul's already commanded you to lead your wife in sanctification, so that she might be holy and blameless. The same is true for your children. Your role is to learn from both, their role is to learn from you, both who God is and what He's like, and how to have a personal relationship. They're going to learn it by watching you, what you teach them. You teach, they learn, it begins with obedience. Because obedience is the schoolmaster needed to help shape the child's behavior, their character, and their belief system. Proper obedience will lead to freedom of living positively out of a love for righteousness rather than a fear of doing wrong. They're very different from each other. We want our children to love righteousness, and they have great freedom in doing that rather than, what's the list of rules and can or can I do this? Now, first and foremost responsibility for children with family, again, obey their parents. The word obey here literally means to hear under, and so includes this idea of hearing and then responding properly. And attitude becomes part of that as well as action. Children that grumble, well, they grumble, they whine, they're actually not being obedient. There's a heart issue. Proverbs 6:20 states, "My son, observe the commandment of your father, do not forsake the teaching of your mother." Now that's not a conspiracy against children so their lives are mercy. It's God's commandment so there would be order in the home and that their lives are going to be filled with blessing. Learning obedience to parents is the very first step in obedience to the Lord and gaining self-control and becoming considerate of others. Now, self-control and considering the interests of others are both vital to getting along with others and becoming successful adults. If you think about it, self-control is the foundational skill for all other learning, both physical and mental. Without mental self-control, you won't sit there to study what you need to study and figure out what you need to figure out and learn what you need to do. You won't read, you're not going to study, you're not going to analyze, you won't solve a problem. That takes a mental acuity to focus. Every subject a child or adults are ever going to take on to study is going to take concentration. Math, history, language, art, science, understanding your Bible. You have to have the capacity to keep your mind focused. In fact, I will say this, a person's mental self-control will enable them to accomplish more than a person's IQ. It is not uncommon to find someone whose IQ is not as high, accomplishes more, is more successful because they apply themselves. Someone naturally smart gets lazy and they completely fail. I actually can say that in my own case. My two brothers are much more intelligent than I am. My younger brother is at one grade behind me. Why are you always out playing? I'm just busy and it seems like I never leave my room. My head's in the book trying to figure this out. And he's just busy out playing sports and everything else, and he'd always be passing. My older brother has nearly photographic memory on anything he's interested in. Problem is for him is that if he's not interested, he doesn't care and doesn't give much attention to it. But otherwise, it's nearly photographic. I'm the one who had to sit there in my seat and work hard at it. Now, all three of us are successful in our own ways. I'm the only one who earned a master's. The others are successful in their fields. But what's weird here is I'm the only one who pursued academics when they had the abilities. I just don't know it worked that way. Maybe it's just to keep us humble, because I know what is necessary. So mental self-control is key to success. Mental self-control enables you to do what's necessary to succeed at whatever it is you're going to be pursuing in the future. And certainly that's even crucial if I'm going to really understand God, because I'm going to have to study the scriptures. I need to dig into them, figure it out. Now, physical self-control is also, because without it, what kind of job can a child actually do? What we're going to be capable of. If a child cannot control their hands, do you want them playing with knives? Probably not. Yes?
No, I said
No. No. You know, some of the simple things we have our kids doing are all part of this learning self-control. For example, coloring. keeping it between the lines is not easy for a little child. And so we're thrilled when they finally start able to do that. That's dexterity. Why do we have them practice their letters? So you can actually read what they write later on. It takes physical self-control to do that. It takes physical self-control to be nimble on a keyboard and use a computer, or I guess kids are more, they only use two, right? That's all, they just need thumbs, but you can do faster this way, right? That takes more self-control. If you can't control your hands, can you drive a nail? If you can't control your hands, please do not use a power saw. Stay away from the chainsaw. You are dangerous. And even the ability to speak requires very precise control of vocal cords, the tongue, and the lips. Clear communication requires the addition of a controlled mind. Otherwise, what you say is nonsense. So little children is almost unintelligible except to the parents and siblings. But you keep working with them so they articulate their words very clearly so other people can understand. That's all about self-control. Obedience is the foundation of that. Now, obedience is also the foundation of being considerate of other people, because obedience combats the selfishness by it requiring you to place your will under that of the parent. There's another authority that will be transferred to other authority figures. If a child continues in selfishness, they're going to lack consideration of other people because it's only about them. What does that lead to? All sorts of interpersonal relationships. You've all worked with people at work who are selfish. Do you like working with them? Absolutely not. They're a pain. In social situations, you try and make friends with someone and this person's just selfish. How long does the friendship end up lasting? Usually not long, because it's going to be destroyed. Personal relationships. What usually ends up causing the conflicts that destroy relationships when two people are dating? Boil it down. What's the bottom line of it? Isn't it selfishness? I want what I want, and you're not giving it to me. All right? Or I want what I want, and I know what you want, and I won't give it to you. So it destroys the relationship. So this all comes back to this whole simple idea: obedience trains us for the things, the skills we're going to need. Obedience trains us for mental self-control, physical self-control, and being considerate of others. Obedience to your parents is also a place you start to learn obedience to God Himself. Because it's from your parents you first learn the consequences of disobedience. Disobedience brings punishment, obedience brings blessing. What did God keep telling Israel all through the Pentateuch? Over and over. Here's my commands. If you obey them, here's the blessings. If you disobey, here's the curses. This is how it works. Well, they learn that from us, because God's still going to hold them accountable. Learn it from us first. Because a child that's not going to learn to obey the simple instructions a parent gives, who's physically present, certainly is not going to obey the more complex commands that God gives when they can't see Him, touch Him. Better to learn the lesson when the consequence, at worst, may be a spanking or removal of a privilege, than the wrath of a holy and just God. So there's an eternal aspect that's important here too. So the primary role of children, learning, begins with this foundation for learning, which is obedience. That's God's command to the children: obey your father and your mother. Serious commandment. Because children that are disobedient to parents have also broken God's commandment. That means it's sin. And parents that let their children get away with disobeying them, guess what you're teaching them? To sin. You're actually training them to sin if you allow them to continue to get away with being disobedient to you. So obedience really is not an option. The eternal consequence of disobedience is separation from God and eternity in hell. Now, what do I mean by obedience? Let's start, since most of you have young kids, with something simple. You call them, what should happen? They should come, right? Should that be difficult? No, it shouldn't be. How many people do you know they call and call and call? At what point will the child finally come? When the parent finally is serious about it. So you could call once, twice, the volume increases, It could be when you hit a certain decibel level, the child knows now they're serious. Threatening, the blood vessels are sticking out of your neck and your face is red. Now they know. The child will actually obey you whenever you actually require it. So, I'm simplistic. I'm a little lazy. I think it just should come the first time. It makes it easier on everybody. I'm not guessing, the child's not guessing. It's very simple. I call, they come. Now, we did that with our children, and we started with a game. We're actually trying to train a dog this way right now, too. We call, they come. And so we played a game, their first toddling. We call and they wander over and they get a big hug and oh, everybody's happy. And we keep stretching it until finally they could come from the other room. And then from the other side of the house, they call. And as they got older and they could speak well, it's like they need to answer. Yes, Mommy. Yes, Daddy. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Whatever it is you have. So now we know they heard us. And knowing they heard us, now we can hold them accountable for it. Because you don't want to hold them accountable when you don't know if they heard you. If you call and you don't hear anything, you go find them. Maybe they're not even in the place. You're not going to get upset with them if they never heard you, right? So it's a very encouraging thing. But of course there's consequences. If they don't come, you're going to bring some kind of consequence to bear. That's all part of training them to obey. So a child is going to obey you. The question is when. And they'll obey you when you require it. If you don't require it, what are you teaching them? To ignore you. It doesn't matter. It's not serious. I can choose what I want. All right? Now, let me put a few limitations on this. The command here is actually for the children are to obey their parents in the Lord. So, children, as with any other situation, they are not to obey commands that are sinful. They're not to obey commands to carry out sin on the behalf of the parents. The first allegiance for all people is to be to God Himself. And so whenever there's a conflict in commandments, we obey God, not man. If a parent asks the child to lie, is the child supposed to lie? No, can't lie. That's disobeying God. If the parent asks the child to steal, no, you can't steal. They're not to assist their parents in committing sin. Children should respectfully decline and take on the consequences, whatever they are, suffer the punishment the same way the apostles and prophets did for the sake of righteousness. That's not easy to ask of a child, but that's actually what should happen. Normally, they're simply going to do whatever they think is going to keep them out of the most trouble. And their concept of God isn't strong, so they're not going to do that. But by the time they're older, you might find some children who love God enough that they might do that. The tragedy is that parents do ask children to lie and steal from them. How often do parents tell children who answer the phone, tell them I'm not here? What did you just ask the child to do? Lie. Lie. You just trained the child to lie. If you don't want to be disturbed, just tell them that. They picked up the phone, well, tell them, I don't want to be disturbed right now, can I call them back? Or get their number, or can they call back later? Just be honest. Teach your children honesty. Don't teach them to lie. That will start coming out in other areas. I've heard of parents who ask their older children, lie about your age so we can get the children's discount. That's stealing. That's lying and stealing. Combine them together. Children obey their parents, but in the Lord, which means obedience to God first, then parents. That's what God declares as right and just before Him. And if you teach them well, who knows? God may bless you some other ways. We were at a restaurant. We're down in Pennsylvania, and they we went to a place for breakfast, and they started asking the children's age, and Jonathan immediately said, well, I'm such and such age, which was 1 year too old. And the waiter said this, well, because you were so honest with me, I'm going to give it to you for free anyways. Wow. Thank you, Lord. That's a blessing. And it reinforced him being honest. That was even the greater blessing. So people, the strange thing there is, why was this person so surprised the child was honest? Probably used to the kids going in there and lying. All right? Honoring parents. Here's the other. So obedience to parents, now honoring parents. I want to take a few moments for this because children need to do this, and we still need to do it even when we're adults. So what does it mean to honor your parents? The commandment there is to obey your parents It comes from Exodus to honor your parents, for this is the first commandment with the promise that it might be well with you and live long in the land. To honor your father and mother does bring a blessing. Specifically here, it will enable you to live long in the land. There's both a general and a specific promise here. It's general in the sense that a person who's learned obedience, a person who has learned these skills, generally is going to have a better life. They'll have a good life. They've learned the skills, self-control, mental self-control, physical self-control. They've learned how to be thoughtful and considerate of others. A person who is like that, they tend to have more friends. They tend to gain better jobs. All this is just part of it. They do better in life because of the skills that have been taught. It's the natural consequences of really learning to honor your parents. Sin characteristically shortens life, while virtue extends it. Similar promises are made to those who are just in their business dealings in Deuteronomy 25:15. Those who are wise, Proverbs 3:16, and who generally keep God's commandments, all the same kind of promise. So that's what we're doing with our children. The promise is also specific here in it's a direct promise of God. He extends a blessing to those who honor their father and mother. Now that doesn't mean that God cannot have a different plan for a specific individual. For example, you honor your father and mother, but you live in a land where Christians are persecuted and you're persecuted. So you may still suffer. But this is the general case specific promise. Obedience to God will bring blessing. Well, what does it mean to honor your parents? Primarily it means, the word itself, to place value upon them. It's demonstrating respect and consideration. It's something that's to be done regardless of the age. Certainly young children are to be respectful of us. They're to show us that. They're to defer to us. We teach them to respect age. In fact, we're going to have a whole thing in a few months just about the whole areas of respect. It's huge for us in teaching our children character traits. Young children they honor their parents primarily by obedience. Older children, they are transitioning to adulthood, they honor their parents by submission. They willingly do what their parents ask. Obedience has been their schoolmaster, and they're bearing the fruit of it. When a child becomes an adult and they live independently, well, they're no longer under parental authority. You're no longer under the authority of your parents. The obedience and submission, they're not required, but something has changed in the authority structure, but there still should be an element of showing them respect, desiring to have a relationship with them, desiring their input in your life, because they still know you, they still have greater wisdom than you. But that can go two ways. If parents have done their job properly, then that is a joy to do. That's the kind of relationship I have with my parents. I love to honor them. And I'm glad to see that even my sons love to honor their grandparents. They've learned that from us. And it's a joy. It's a joy to do anything for them. To show them respect, appreciation, to call and ask advice. Their care is needed. And I'm very grateful that we see that in our sons. They come to us the same way. That's where we want to end up. That should be joy. Now, parents that have not done their job properly, and this could be your own case, then you've suffered. And that relationship has a lot of pain in it. Trust may have been broken. The current relationship could be very strained. But regardless of the past, the scriptures are still true. You're still to honor your parents. At minimum, that means you don't speak evil of them, you don't slander them, you don't let them go hungry, you don't ignore them in time of need, because at worst, they may still be a neighbor, and Christ even told us to love our enemies. So it's still going to apply. What is going to be missing for you is joy. Honoring becomes a duty instead of a joyful devotion. Even so, you can still honor them out of a love for Jesus Christ and a desire to be obedient to Christ. All the while praying the Lord is still going to bring them to salvation and bring about the kind of relationship that should exist. Now, in considering that, what kind of relationship do you want your children to have with you? You see how you parent them is going to reflect that kind of relationship. Are they going to honor you out of joy, or is it going to be just a duty? The role of children: obey their parents in the Lord. Learn about God, learn about the world He's created, learn how to live in obedience to the Lord. And if you want godly children, then you teach them to be that way, starting with your own example. And I pray that your children are going to learn and grow and build upon your shoulders, to go past you. I'm very grateful that I'm definitely seeing that with the older two. They are past me. I keep telling Jonathan he's a better man than I am. He says, no, I'm not. I said, yeah, but I'm looking at, you're only 29. I know where I was at 29. Look at where you're at 29. Incredible. And he is a better preacher than I am. That I won't back off on. But you know what? That is a blessing, isn't it? Parents should never be in competition with their children. In fact, I don't need, how can they be? Jonathan, when he was little, we would arm wrestle. You know, and little, of course, everything. As he's getting a little older, you know, it's a little more of a strain. And then, I'm going to beat you, Daddy, I'm going to beat you. And then one day it was like, oh, I actually had to work a little bit at it. And I said, son, you know, someday you actually are going to beat me. And you know what I'm going to do then? I don't know, Daddy, what are you going to do? I'm going to put my arm around and say, that's my son. You'll never get away from a father's pride. We want our children to succeed. We want them to go beyond us. I think that's a godly thing. We want our children to be more godly than we were. And they should be, because they should be standing on your shoulders, watching your example, so they have a higher platform to build upon than what you had. So, it's a great blessing. And I will say this before we take another 5-minute break. 3 sons, the 2 older ones are following Christ and serve Him. The younger one is not a Christian, he'll tell you that. He struggles with some things. And yet we find he's still a blessing. He still lives at home, and we're actually very glad that he does live at home. We still find him to be a blessing because what we did in our parenting trained him to be respectful of us. And he is very respectful of us. He has the character qualities we wanted in him. We continue to pray for his salvation because that would make it even better. But whether your child becomes a Christian or not, you can train your child that they will still be a blessing to you and to those around you. And I can honestly say that's true even of Jimmy. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break.